They say history is written by the victors, but what about the histories no one wants to write? The ones sealed behind rotting doors and blood-stained names buried in unmarked graves and passed down in silence? Annabelle Harper was never meant to be found. She was the end product of generations of secrets, stitched together by fear, control, and the relentless echo of inherited madness. Her story wasn't in textbooks. It wasn't whispered in classrooms or carved into plaques. It lived only in the shadows of a family tree that should have been cut down a century ago. And yet, even now, it still grows. What happened in the Harper home wasn't a tragedy born of ignorance. It was engineered, maintained, ritualized. They believed in something, not just blood purity, but transformation. They thought they were becoming something greater, beyond human, beyond morality, a kind of closed-loop evolution, and in Annabelle, they believed they had succeeded. But what they created was not evolution, it was entropy. Annabelle didn't survive, she endured. A vessel for every warped gene, every broken law of nature, every sin passed from father to daughter to child. Her body was a library of secrets no doctor could explain. Her mind a haunted corridor with doors no one dared open. And now, she's gone. No gravesite, no ashes, no photos, just rumors, and the unease that something followed her out of those woods. There are sightings. People claim to see a pale girl standing at the edge of forests in the dead of night, unmoving. Children have dreams of a house with no windows and a man without a face. In some versions of the story, she returns to the Harper land every winter, to wait, to listen, not for family, but for blood. And maybe that's the truth of it, that some lineages were never meant to stretch across generations, that some family trees don't grow, they rot inward, feeding on themselves until what's left is no longer human, but something older. The Harper family may be gone, but something of them remains. In the dirt, in the silence, in the parts of this country we've forgotten. And if you ever find yourself walking through an empty town, somewhere deep in the hills, and you see a little girl staring from behind a curtain, don't knock. Because some doors were never meant to be opened, and some stories were never meant to be remembered. The last known record of Annabelle was dated 5 years ago. Her file marked her as non-verbal, low-risk, and psychologically dormant. She had been transferred to a long-term care facility in rural Pennsylvania, an older institution, the kind with more locks than doctors and a budget barely large enough to feed its patients, let alone treat them. She was 18 by then, legally an adult, but she never aged the way others did. Her body remained thin, fragile, her eyes distant, always distant. The staff nicknamed her Echo because she never responded to her name, only to sounds. Footsteps, knocks, wind against glass. She never had visitors, no remaining family, no legal guardians. The Harper bloodline, for all intents and purposes, had ended with her. But then, the fire happened. Officially, it was blamed on faulty wiring. A short circuit in the east wing triggered a blaze that consumed half the building before firefighters could reach it. 3 patients died. 8 were relocated, but one, just one, was marked unaccounted for. Annabelle. No remains were found in her room, no clothing, no bedding, just the charred outline of her mattress and a strange symbol burned into the floorboards beneath it. A ring of ash and small bones arranged in a near-perfect circle. Animal bones, they claimed, but no one could explain how they got there. Security footage showed nothing. Her wing had lost power an hour before the fire began. Cameras went black. When they came back online, the hallway was already filled with smoke. But one nurse reported something strange, a voice on the intercom just before the alarms. A girl's voice, soft, cold. She said, "It's time to go home now." The facility was shut down permanently. The case closed as an accident, but people in the town began to whisper. about strange figures seen near the woods, about mirrors in their homes falling off walls without warning, about children sleep-talking in voices that weren't their own. One boy, age 9, went missing for 2 hours and was found standing barefoot in the snow. When asked what happened, he simply said, "The girl showed me the roots." Annabelle had vanished, but the feeling she left behind didn't. Something had been buried in that house, in those bones, in that bloodline, and now it was loose. Not as a ghost, not as a girl, but as a memory that refuses to stay buried. Annabelle was placed into psychiatric care, though care might be a generous term. The state didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't violent, she wasn't verbal, she just existed, day after day, staring at corners, never speaking unless spoken to, and even then only in fragments, words with no context, phrases like, "He's still hungry," or "The roots are watching." She refused to eat certain foods, would only sleep on the floor, and sometimes, only sometimes, she would smile, but never when someone was looking directly at her. Doctors tried everything: cognitive therapy, speech development, even trauma-based treatment plans designed for severely abused children, but nothing stuck. Her brain scans revealed abnormal development in the frontal cortex, twisted neural pathways that no specialist could fully explain. She was functional, but miswired. Not broken, just rewritten. One nurse said it best: "It's like someone scrambled the code of a person and hit print anyway." There was one breakthrough, though, a drawing. They gave her crayons, not expecting anything, but she began to draw the same image, again and again. A large, faceless man in a black coat standing behind a girl with long black hair, her. Sometimes in a forest, sometimes in the house, always behind her, always the same. When asked who he was, she only said, "He's in the walls now." It wasn't enough to classify her as delusional, but it was enough to haunt the staff, especially when maintenance workers discovered a hidden crawl space behind her old bedroom wall back in the Harper home. Inside it, they found something worse than journals. They found bones, small ones, 5 sets carefully arranged, likely children. No formal graves, no headstones, just shallow pits beneath the floor, marked by bundles of twine. It became clear this wasn't just inbreeding, it was a belief system, a cult of blood, bound by secrecy and sustained by sacrifice, and Annabelle was the final vessel. They shut the house down, sealed the property, but by then the story had already leaked, filtered into tabloids, conspiracy blogs, online forums that feast on stories too grotesque to be real. And yet, this one was. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you bury the past, or dig it up? Because there was still one last question. Where is Annabelle now? Her name was Lillian Harper, 87 years old, last recorded address, a decaying farmhouse nearly 60 miles from where Annabelle had been found. When officials arrived, the door was already open, not broken, not forced, just open, as if someone had been expecting a reckoning. Lillian hadn't spoken to anyone outside the family in over 30 years. No phone, no electricity, just an oil lamp and stacks of yellowed newspapers that hadn't been printed in decades. Her mind drifted, her memory fracturing in slow, unpredictable waves. But when they asked her about Annabelle, something sharpened in her eyes, a flicker of recognition and dread. She didn't call her Annabelle, she called her the last one. "They shouldn't have made her," Lillian said, her voice thin and papery. The blood was already bad, twisted up like wire underwater, and then they went and made her anyway. She spoke in fragments, weaving through memories like a woman trying to find the end of a rope in the dark. But one thing was clear. Lillian had seen it happen before. The births, the deaths, the children who never cried, the ones who wouldn't eat unless it was from the same spoon every time. The family had rules, rituals, patterns that no outsider would understand. She said Elijah started it, that he believed God had punished him with the war, and the only way to cleanse that punishment was to purify the bloodline. Keep it untouched, keep it closer to the bone. But it didn't stay pure. It curdled, became a cycle, a self-consuming loop that bred silence, deformity, and madness. She told them about the locked rooms, the sound of crying from behind floorboards, the one child they buried inside the barn wall, and then she told them about the mirror ritual. Once a year, they would place the youngest child in front of a mirror, alone, for exactly 1 hour. No food, no light, just the child and the glass. If the child cried, they were weak. If they laughed, they were blessed. If they did nothing, they were chosen. Annabelle did nothing, just stared, for 60 minutes, unmoving, at age 3. Lillian said that's when the others started to fear her, even Joseph, even the mother who birthed her. They thought she was Elijah, she whispered. Come back, not reborn, just returned. That was the last thing she said before she shut her eyes and refused to speak again. Whatever the truth was, it hadn't died with Joseph. It was still breathing, still watching, still inside Annabelle. The attic was more crawl space than room, dust-heavy, packed with rotting furniture, broken tools, and jars of preserved animals floating in formaldehyde. But near the back wall, hidden beneath a warped floorboard, investigators found 3 leather-bound journals. The paper was brittle, ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, tight, angry, obsessed. The name on the inside cover, Joseph Harper, Annabelle's father. What the journals described wasn't just disturbing, it was structured. Generations of calculated isolation, a belief passed down like scripture that the Harper bloodline was sacred, that outside influence would taint it, that purity came from within, and only within. Joseph wrote about the pact, a spoken agreement passed from Elijah to his sons, then to theirs. No outsiders, no mixing, no dilution. Marry your cousin, bear your own blood. Repeat, keep the line clean, keep the blood strong. But the blood wasn't strong. It was broken, fragmented. Some of the children born into the Harper line didn't survive past infancy. Others did, but were never seen outside. Joseph described them in detached clinical tones. Number 4, no ears, malformed spine, eyes milky, buried near the ash pit. Like he was cataloguing livestock, not human lives. He believed these deformities weren't failures, but signs, proof that the bloodline was trying to correct itself. He wrote, "We are being shaped, refined. Those who don't survive were not chosen. Annabelle was." He saw his daughter as a holy vessel, a chosen child born from generations of sacred union. But he also feared her. There were passages in the later entries where the tone shifted, from reverence to terror. He wrote of Annabelle's silence, her tendency to stare at empty rooms for hours, how she would whisper to things that weren't there. One line read, "She sees Elijah, she speaks to him when I'm not watching." By this point, Joseph was barely coherent. Pages were smeared, words repeated like mantras. He had stopped writing dates. Instead, the final entry simply read, "The bloodline ends here. She's too strong. She carries all of us." When authorities pieced the timeline together, it became clear Joseph hadn't just locked Annabelle away. He was trying to contain something he believed had gone too far, that whatever the Harpers had become was no longer human. But how long had this gone on? How far back did the darkness stretch? There was one person still alive who might know, an aunt, still living, still hiding. The land the family lived on was once owned by a man named Elijah Harper, Annabelle's great-great-grandfather. A Civil War veteran turned recluse, Elijah was said to have returned home from the battlefield, not quite right. He bought 90 acres of thick, uncut forest and fenced it off from the rest of Kentucky. He never married outside his family, neither did his children, or theirs. The Harpers were proud, secretive people. No neighbors, no visitors. They grew their own food, built their own coffins, and burned their trash in pits instead of hauling it away. Every few decades, one of them would come into town for supplies, salt, oil, ammunition, and then vanish again, swallowed by the woods. Locals whispered about them, called them the ghost family, the dirt bloods, or worse. But no one dared go near, not because of fear, because of shame. Everyone knew, but pretending not to was easier. By the time Annabelle was born, the family had shrunk to just 6. Her parents, both cousins, her grandfather, blind and mute, and 3 siblings, all of whom had physical or cognitive deformities. But Annabelle was the worst affected. She could barely walk without stumbling. Her speech, when it came, was fragmented, like someone had taught her only parts of the language. Her words were more sound than meaning. Medical records later revealed that she had never received a single vaccination. Her bones showed signs of rickets, malnutrition, her organs strangely undersized. It was as if her body had been asked to build itself using blueprints written in static. When social services asked her where her mother was, she pointed to a jar on the shelf, cloudy yellow liquid, a shape inside. No one spoke for a long time after that. DNA testing later confirmed what many had already guessed. The degree of inbreeding in Annabelle's bloodline wasn't just severe. It was almost unprecedented in modern American history. Both her parents carried near-identical genetic markers, the same defective genes passed again and again like heirlooms in a locked house. Annabelle wasn't just a child, she was a biological scream. A silent protest from nature itself, forced into a corner it could no longer escape. And still, this was only the beginning. The journals found in the attic, kept by her father, would reveal what can only be described as generational madness. A madness that was not only allowed, but ritualized. They found her behind a locked door. No name, no birth certificate, no school records. Just a girl, pale as bone, with wide, hollow eyes that didn't blink when you stared back. The house smelled like rusted metal and wet fabric. There were no mirrors, no family portraits, only silence and her. She didn't speak at first, not a word, not even when the sheriff asked her name, just rocked slowly, clutching a doll that had no eyes. It took weeks before anyone figured out who she was, months before the truth started bleeding through. The house was deep in the Appalachian woods, in a place where even the mail didn't go. Locals called it a holler, one of those forgotten folds in the map where families kept to themselves. Too far from town to be seen, too close to sanity to be safe. They said the family hadn't left their land in generations. No hospitals, no schools, no outsiders, just blood, over and over, blood from the same tree. What she was wasn't a myth, wasn't a rumor whispered by nosy neighbors or bored journalists. She was the result of over 100 years of isolation, repetition, and denial. A girl born of the same bloodlines, folded back on themselves until the body forgot how to form right, and the mind started slipping. She couldn't read, couldn't write. She flinched at sunlight. Her bones had twisted in strange ways, her teeth crooked like branches in a dead forest. But it was her silence that chilled the doctors most, a kind of stillness that didn't feel human, as if she had never learned how to be one. The hospital only learned her name by accident, scrawled on a piece of brown paper hidden in a floorboard back at the house. One word: Annabelle. No last name, no date, just Annabelle. But names mean nothing when the story behind them is too dark to speak aloud. Annabelle wasn't just a neglected child, she was the product of a bloodline that had folded in on itself so many times that nature had stopped trying to make sense of it, and what investigators would find next would uncover one of the most disturbing family trees in American history.